Hello students, and welcome to the CompTIA Tech Plus exam course brought to you by Third Level Technology. I'm your instructor, Jim Herbie. In this episode, we're going to continue in Module 2 in the exam objectives by discussing Section 2.2. Our topic is internal computer components. Let's begin. We're going to begin our discussion about internal computer components by talking about motherboards. Motherboards are a very important component inside of your computer because it is the piece of hardware that will connect all of the other components within your computer system. A motherboard has two primary functions: to provide power supply and connectivity between all of the different hardware components inside of your computer. These will be things such as your CPU, your RAM memory, your storage, and other expansion capabilities such as video, graphics, and sound cards. Your motherboards for desktop computers have very common form factors. Form factor is the shape of the motherboard. There are two common manufacturers of motherboards, ITX and ATX. Your motherboard will connect to the external casing of the computer. This is because at different locations on the motherboard, there will be interfaces for cables and peripheral devices. Your motherboards will have what are called screw mounts. These are going to be locations on the motherboard where you will find screws that you can use to fasten the motherboard to the exterior computer case. Your motherboard will have very common features across all of your different form factors. Places for CPU, we call these CPU sockets, locations and capability for RAM memory, storage, as well as other features such as cooling fans and expansion slots that will expand the capability of your motherboard. Motherboards for laptop computers are called system boards. With desktop motherboards, you have two common manufacturers, ITX and ATX, and they share common characteristics such as the location of the screw mounts as well as your interface slots. With laptops, you don't have standard form factors. Each laptop manufacturer and brand will have a specific system board that is proprietary to that model. With laptop system boards, it is very difficult to replace individual components, because each system board will have its own form factor and location for different components within. When you have some type of failure with a laptop system board, you frequently are going to have to replace the entire board itself. Your system boards will have the same type of electrical connections that you do see in your desktop motherboards. This will allow all of your input and output devices, as well as peripherals, to connect and have connectivity over the same system board. Next, we're going to discuss firmware. And firmware is also what we call the BIOS. BIOS stands for Basic Input Output System. Your BIOS is going to be firmware. Firmware is going to be the capability for hardware devices to connect to your operating system. And your firmware is going to be where we can create rules and configurations to allow our operating system to interact with our hardware correctly. Your BIOS has two different types: legacy BIOS and UEFI or UE5 BIOS. Your legacy BIOS will be what you find in your older operating systems. A legacy BIOS will be a text-based only display. It will allow you to create different types of configurations for how your operating system works, as well as being able to control what's called the boot order. Your boot order is going to be what are all of the different tests and functions that the computer will launch when you power it on. In your more modern computers and operating systems, we have what's called a UEFI BIOS, UE5 BIOS. This stands for Unified Extensible Firmware Interface. And UE5 BIOS is a great improvement over the legacy BIOS because it provides a graphical-based user interface. This allows us to control certain configurations such as volume, brightness, screen contrast, and many others by using charts and graphical icons instead of text-based controls. In a UE5 BIOS, we also will have the ability to store and launch application drivers, files that we store and install on our computer to allow us to launch specific types of applications. UE5 BIOS also allows us to configure our storage backups, as well as the ability to remotely troubleshoot certain types of hardware that may be malfunctioning within our system. Our next internal component is RAM, RAM. This is Random Access Memory. RAM is temporary storage. It requires a power supply to access all of the data and applications that are stored in it. When you turn on your computer and you launch a certain type of application or access a file, those applications and files will then become stored in your RAM memory. This will allow the user and the computer to access recently opened files and apps more quickly. With RAM memory, we use a form factor called the memory card. These will be rectangular shaped cards that have different memory cells located along the strip. And inside of your computer on the motherboard, you will have specifically designated slots where you can insert memory cards to allow your computer to access this capability. Next, we're going to discuss the CPU, the Central Processing Unit. Your CPU is a very important component because it handles all of the processing instructions for your computer. We use our CPU to launch and work within applications. Our CPU also allows us to access and store data in our memory. Our CPUs also will handle all of our operating system functions. On your motherboard, you will have a specific location where we will insert a CPU into a socket. And each CPU will have its own layout as far as the metallic pins that are used for all of our processing connections. Two very common CPU layouts are pin grid array, PGA, and land grid array, LGA, slotted into the motherboard sockets. And this will allow the CPU to connect to all of the different components that are on the motherboard. CPUs are typically manufacturer specific. That means if you want to replace a CPU, you're going to want to replace it with another unit that is from the same manufacturer that has been designated as the upgrade to that option. Within your CPU, we have two different processor types, 32-bit and 64-bit. And this refers to the amount of processing instructions that an operating system CPU can process at one time. And the way you would calculate that value is to take the number 2 and take it to the power of 32 for 32 bits, and 2 to the power of 64 for 64 bits. Those are mathematical calculations you can do on your own if you want to get an idea about the entire capability of each type of CPU processor. 32-bit CPUs can only run 32-bit applications. 64-bit operating systems are the most commonly seen in your modern operating systems. This will be your most recent version of Windows 10 and 11, Mac OS, and Linux. 64-bit operating systems are what we call backward compatible. That means they can run both 64-bit and 32-bit applications as long as you have the correct drivers installed on your machine. Next, we're going to discuss an expansion bus. An expansion bus is a location on your motherboard that allows us to add certain types of system performance to expand what our computer is capable of. We typically use expansion bus if we want to increase our RAM memory or other types of capabilities such as video, audio, and sound cards. Your expansion bus is going to be determined by how many slots are contained within your motherboard form factor. Your expansion bus will also have its own clock speed. This is the amount of operations that your computer can process in 1 second. Your expansion bus will have its own clock speed depending on the type of cards that you are adding into your internal computer system. Next, we're going to discuss the different types of permanent storage. We discussed RAM memory, and we discussed that it is a temporary storage option when our computer is powered on. We also call that volatile storage. We have a couple different types of permanent storage that are what we call non-volatile. This is where we can store data permanently without the need for a consistent power supply. The two most common that you will see in your desktop and laptop computers are hard disk drive, HDDs, and solid state drives, SSDs. A hard disk drive is one that uses rotating platter disks. We'll use magnetism to store data on each platter disk, and it uses a component called an actuator arm. And as the disks are spinning inside of the computer, the actuator arm will be able to locate data that is stored at a specific location on each disk. There are two common form factor sizes for our hard disks. They are 2.5 and 3.5 inches. One drawback to a hard disk drive is that it is difficult to replace the parts. If we have damage that is occurring on our platter disks, we typically will have to replace the entire drive itself. Hard disk drives will also require cooling options, but hard disk drives are known for creating large amounts of heat because of the constant rotation of the disks. So we always want to make sure we have cooling options for our hard disk drives. SSDs, solid state drives. These are different from our hard disk drives because they don't have any moving parts. There are no rotating disks. There are no actuator arms. Solid state drives use a technology called flash cell. Each individual cell inside of the solid state drive will store data, and we can locate the stored data by our computer accessing specific cells within the SSD. There are several common form factors for solid state drives. For laptops, you typically see 1.8 inches and 2.5 inches. For your desktop computers, you typically see 3.5 inch or 5.25 inch form factors for your solid state drives. You also should be familiar with CPUs that are used for smartphones and tablets. These are called ARM processors. ARM stands for Advanced RISC Machines. These are CPUs that are designed specifically for mobile devices. They will have smaller form factor size, as well as a lower power consumption. ARM processors come in both 32-bit and 64-bit versions, and you will typically find these in your smartphones as well as fitness monitors and wearable technologies such as health and biometric monitors. Our next component we're going to talk about is a network interface card, NIC. Sometimes you will hear this referred to as a NIC. A network interface card is a hardware component that allows the motherboard to provide both wired and wireless internet connectivity. On a network interface card, interface slots for wired Ethernet. This will allow the computer to connect to our cabled Ethernet network. Your network interface card will also have cards that are installed onto the network interface card that will allow for connectivity for both 802.11 wireless internet as well as Bluetooth. We call these WAN connections, which stands for Wide Area Network, where we can have our computer connect to both public and private wireless network connections. And the last component we're going to discuss are cooling fans. Cooling fans are very important because they allow us to provide airflow within our personal computers. Many of your components, such as your hard disk drives and your CPUs, will generate a good amount of heat because of the constant processing that they are doing while the computer is powered on. Your cooling fans will allow us to keep those components at a suitable temperature, as well as to remove dust and particles that may become situated inside the computer. Cooling fans will be located on the internal parts of the motherboard, where the CPU and hard disk drives will typically be located. There are 3 standard cooling fan sizes: 80 millimeter, 120 millimeter, and 200 millimeter. And depending on the size and form factor of your motherboard, that will help to determine the size of the cooling fan that you may see within your computer. That will conclude our discussion of Section 2.2, Internal Computer Components. In our next episode, we will move on to Section 2.3, and our topic is storage types. We thank you again for following along in the episodes and the course, and wish you best of luck in your studies. Enjoy the rest of your day.